Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Corrine Wierzinski. I'm the Assistant Dean and Director for Undergraduate Research here at Michigan State University. Welcome to our Grad Chat session in Physical Sciences and Engineering. This replaces an in-person program that we normally offer in the Office of Undergraduate Research at MSU. It's a time for students at any level in their undergraduate career, or even after they've graduated, to talk to current graduate students at Michigan State University about why they decided to pursue graduate school, why they decided to come to MSU to pursue their graduate studies, and to ask questions about what the graduate experience is like. No question is silly. This is a great time to talk to real live graduate students about their experiences and the advice they had from whether applying to graduate school or experiences they're having now. In a moment, you'll meet our panelists. Christina, if you could advance to the next slide. Oh, I think we covered this. That's me. You've seen me already. Next, I'll have our two monitors of questions, Heather Dover and Christina Eigel, just briefly introduce themselves. Heather?
Hello, I'm Heather Dover. I'm a coordinator for undergraduate research. I manage all of our events and programs in our office, and we're very glad to have you here today.
And next, you'll hear from Christina, who will also talk about how you can submit questions during our webinar. Christina?
Hi everyone, my name is Christina Eigel, and I am a current master's student at Michigan State University, and I also work in the office. I'm a program assistant, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about how you can submit questions. So you can ask questions at any point in the presentation using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. It might be in a different location if you do not have Zoom downloaded. Heather and I will monitor the Q&A, and your question might be answered live, like right after you ask it, or we might wait to kind of fold it in a little bit more naturally into the presentation. We also might answer it via the Q&A feature, so we can type responses, so make sure to look there. And then we're also going to have kind of a designated period at the end of the presentation that's just for questions that you all ask.
Thanks, Christina. So to reiterate, you can ask questions at any time as they pop up, and then we'll be monitoring that. Just an overview of what's happening today. We'll do panelist introductions in a moment. We have a few questions to ask you, the participants, via survey, so we can get an idea of kind of where you are in the graduate school process. And then we have 3 to 4 questions that we'd like to get through. However, in our webinar yesterday, we made it through 2 of them because we had so many great questions. So part of our agenda will be determined by the questions that you ask. And I will say this as a former graduate program coordinator, that if you have a question about graduate school, probably someone else on this chat also has the same question. So feel free to ask that. Next slide, please. All right, next we're going to hear from our panelists. They're each going to just give a brief introductions of who they are. They'll state their name, the degree that they're pursuing, the lab that they're working with, and where they're from. We'll go in order as we see here across the screen. So Rahul, we'll begin with you.
Hello everyone. I'm Rahul Jain. I'm a graduate student in the Department of Physics and Astronomy and CMSE. I work in the Nuclear Astrophysics Lab at the Facility for Rare Isotope Beams. I'm originally from India, where I completed my integrated master's and then moved to the US to start my PhD.
Thank you. Caitlin?
So I'm Caitlin Casulli. I'm a 4th year, going into my 4th year of my PhD in Dr. Kirk Dolan's lab. Also collaborating with a lab at Rutgers University under Dr. Don Schaffner. I'm originally from North Carolina, and I've been here for a while now. Started with my master's and now trying to finish up my PhD.
Thanks, Caitlin. Tyler?
Hello, my name is Tyler. I am in my final year, the 5th year of my PhD, studying computer science and engineering. I'm a member of the Data Science and Engineering Lab. I'll have my defense this month, and will be joining Vanderbilt University next month. And my advisor is Dr. Jiliang Tong.
So when Tyler mentioned that he's defending, or his defense is next month, that means he's defending his dissertation. So there's a proposal process, and then at the end of it, you defend your research. It's a long conversation with you and a committee. So Tyler is a week away of being done with this process. So congratulations again, Tyler. And last but not least, Julia.
Hi, my name is Julia Hines. I am going into my second year of my physics PhD program. I research in experimental high energy physics. So I work with the Atlas collaboration here at MSU. I work with Dan Hayden, and I'm originally from North Carolina.
Okay, we're going to jump in with a couple of our poll questions right now. So you should be seeing a poll on your screen. The question is, how strongly are you currently considering attending grad school? So maybe you're already enrolled, you don't know if grad school's in your future, you're not sure if you need to or want to attend graduate school. Maybe you don't really want to go to grad school, but your career path might require it. You might be exploring, or you're not really interested. So we'll give you a couple minutes to take a look at that.
So please take a second and respond to this first question that Christina has posed. This will help us kind of gauge some of our comments. While you're responding to that, just a few points on our panelists. One is, if you don't see your discipline area represented, that's okay, okay? PhD programs are different. There's also some common features across PhD programs, regardless of the discipline. If you're interested in a different type of engineering that's not computer science or biosystems, my guess is Caitlin and Tyler can still provide some background on their experience. The other part is that all these people on our panelists today, while they're at different points in their doctoral program, they all were undergraduate students like you not too long ago, okay? So they remember what it's like to apply to a PhD program, and they have a pretty good understanding of just some of the experiences they went through in getting to the point where they are now. So with that, Christina, I'll turn it back to you. We can see the response here to this first question.
So it looks like we have quite a few folks who know that grad school is in their future, and then some people just exploring. Looks like some folks are not really wanting to head the grad school route, but know they might need to for their career path. So that's great. We'll be talking about all the different perspectives during this session. I'm going to go ahead and share another poll question in just a moment.
So while Christine is pulling up the second poll question, oh, right here, are you an MSU student? If you could just respond to that, it just gives us some perspective of if you're coming from the MSU community or if you are external. So take a moment to answer that. A question we'll explore is that some people choose to do a PhD at their undergraduate institution. Some people move to a different institution. So that's another issue that we'll try to explore here in the next 55 minutes. And while we're waiting, you can also start to ask questions on the chat feature, and we will start working that into our questions. Christina, while you're, oh, thank you. So we have all MSU students who are joining us today. Great.
Yep, so that is it for our polls. And then we're gonna move into some facilitated discussion now, but as Corinne said, feel free to drop those questions in the Q&A box, and we will make sure to monitor those while we're moving through the program today.
Thanks, Christine. If you could advance the slide. All right, so the first question that we'll hear from each panelist today is, what made them decide to pursue a graduate degree? Does someone want to start first? If you just want to unmute yourself, and then we'll go down the line of what made you decide to get a PhD, and then we'll move to why MSU. But let's do that first question of why a doctoral degree. All right, Caitlin, looks like you're going first.
Yep, I can go ahead and start. So I did my undergraduate in food science, which is more on the agricultural sciences side than engineering. When I was an undergraduate, I started out with research the summer before my freshman year, and I continued it all the way through my undergraduate degree. And I think probably sometime around my junior or senior year, I realized I really did enjoy the engineering more so than kind of more of the chemistry or sensory science side of food science. And I knew I didn't really want to go into product development, which is really where a lot of people go. They do Q&A jobs or go on to graduate school for food science and do product development. I was more into the math and the kind of heat transfer, mass transfer, and combining that with microbial and activation models. So I think it was ultimately a decision of, one, really liking research, and two, not feeling like I was going to get what I wanted with a job with just a bachelor's degree in food science. So that is why I'm in graduate school right now.
Thanks, Caitlin. Let's go next to Tyler.
Sure. So I guess initially I was a computer science undergraduate student, and just in general, I didn't want to graduate and leave the university. So I did a dual major in math. And then as that was coming to an end, I came to realize that graduate school could be an option. And I wasn't sure, having not done research at that point, that do I really want to go for a PhD or not? And so I ended up staying at the same university at Penn State and did a master's. And then after doing a master's, kind of realized I liked tutoring and teaching. And if I also like research, that PhD was the most natural choice. And so I think for me, the decision to do the PhD was having had some experience in research, but then also paired with knowing that I wanted to end up being a professor in the future.
I'm just curious, Tyler, how long was your master's degree program?
So it was 2 years.
Okay. And then did you apply for your PhD program during that second year of the master's degree program? Great, thank you. Let's hear from Julia next.
Hi. So my background, I'm in physics and in chemistry. So I was a double major when I was an undergrad. And so I always loved doing research. And so I was always in the lab doing research. But one of my favorite experiences was actually going to a national lab to do research. And it was phenomenal and I loved it. And so I knew that was what I wanted to do career-wise, was to somehow make my way to a national lab. And to do that, you had to have a PhD in physics. So that's kind of what pushed me to go to graduate school and trying to work towards my PhD, was for that goal.
Thanks, Julia. So already from the three panelists who have spoken, each of them had engaged in some type of research experience. If you have not had a research experience yet, we're with the Undergraduate Research Office, and after this webinar, you should circle back to our website and we can help you find a research position on campus. Just a plug for the office. Last but not least, Rahul, if you could talk about why you decided to pursue a terminal degree.
Yeah, so I mean, it's almost like the same, that I also loved research a lot. I did some internships during the summers of my undergraduate years, and it really felt nice. I mean, doing research was a good thing, but there was like options of doing research like on job as well as in school. But one of the reasons I chose to do a graduate school was like that I enjoyed the flexibility that the graduate school provides. I mean, in terms of the lifestyle, for example, you can choose your own hours to work. So that was like really the motivating factor for me, because sometimes I can work in the morning and then so I play squash, so I can like play during the lunchtime, like fit in a game of squash and then work towards for the rest of the day. Sometimes in the mornings, schedule some activities and then work in the evening. So the flexibility is the biggest motivator for me to be in like grad school and in academia in general. Another choice was like traveling, because when I attended a conference, I got to visit like a lot of new places, and that's also one aspect of grad school that I really enjoy, like traveling, going to conferences, or even for doing research. So those were the biggest like factors in deciding to go to grad school for me.
Thank you, Rahul. And thank you also to Aaron, Adita, and Nicholas for asking questions. You've all asked questions about focusing on how to pick a graduate program. And Adita, we'll get to your question for Tyler in just a moment. But Aaron asked about how do you pick an area to specialize? Even within one field of engineering, there are many specialized labs that focus on specific topics. So before we get into Aaron's question, I think first is, how did any of you decide on which graduate programs to decide to? So I think if we could hear from two of you about how you went about finding the programs to apply to, and then we'll move to the specialization question, unless you want to bundle that together. Anyone want to take a first round at answering this question?
I can go.
Great, Rahul, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, finding a program is partly trial and error and partly like people you know. So for example, in my previous internships, I did like research in a lot of different fields, from like nonlinear dynamics to high energy physics to nuclear physics. And even after like towards the end, I was pretty sure that I want to do something with nuclear physics, but there are like so many topics in nuclear physics as well. So like nuclear astrophysics, nuclear structure, and stuff like that. So when I came here, I had no background in astrophysics, but I started my program in nuclear astrophysics. So it was like kind of exploration choice, and then it worked out in the end. So it's partly trial and error and partly what opportunities come your way.
Does anyone have anything else to add to that, to that response about how do you go about selecting programs?
I also, for my program, I thought it was important to choose a school that had a lot of different options. So I actually applied to, I always knew I wanted to do physics for my PhD, but I was more interested in, like, for example, neutrino physics when I was applying. So I applied to a bunch of schools for that. But one thing that really drew me to MSU was the fact that I could switch. So I did switch over to a different area of physics once I got here and explored different research opportunities, and I love it. So I definitely recommend like finding one that has a lot of different options, especially if you're unsure. So that way you can kind of try different ones and see which one fits you best.
I wasn't sure if Caitlin, you had something else to add to that, because it looked like you were about to respond.
Yeah, I mean, I could add something real quick. I think I ended up just kind of taking it as a funnel. So I spoke with my undergraduate advisor and I said, okay, here's like the big broad area I'm interested in, food engineering. Kind of narrowed that down to professors who kind of worked in areas I was interested in. So I was interested in more of processing and impacts on microbial inactivation. So I narrowed it down from there. And then I said, well, really, if I want to work on something that's going to be cutting edge and really applicable in industry, because when I started my master's degree, I thought I was just going to finish off and go into industry. So I wanted something very cutting edge and applicable. So I chose more of a narrow research topic based on that. And then it was really just that basically narrowed it down to MSU. There were two professors here working in the area, and that's how I ended up here.
Okay, so Caitlin, or you sound very, very knowledgeable, and that winnowing down process can be very intimidating when you're starting at the front end of a PhD program. And several students have asked about how do you have that conversation? You mentioned that you would talk to a mentor. Did any of you talk to a research mentor, a graduate student in your in your undergraduate research experience? How do you go about finding those specific programs? Because there are a lot of different specializations, and as a sophomore or a junior or senior, you may not know that you want to be in a certain specialization. Any advice for students about how to begin that narrowing down process?
I think as far as the specialization, even if you're not in research right now, it's helpful just to take a look at your classes and kind of pick the ones off the menu that you think were pretty good, and maybe just talk to those professors to start with and say, hey, I really liked your class. I know this is something that maybe you do research in, or maybe you know people that do research in this area, and just help kind of guide me from there.
Tyler?
I would say in general, just any experiences that you could get in research would be great, especially as an undergrad, that I myself really didn't have that. But I think that when applying for graduate programs, even if you did undergrad like research in topic A, but you're applying for topic B, that's still very applicable and helpful for your application. And I think that kind of the second half of the question, where it's also in regards to like choosing the topic, that I myself had changed topics when going from the master's to PhD. I had the same topic, but then I ended up switching topics and advisors about 1.5 years into the PhD program. And I think that as long as your undergrad is the same direction as your graduate degree, there shouldn't be any problems. That typically, I think, especially in a lot of the engineering, you're structured that your background knowledge, probably within a semester, you could get up to speed to research in a new direction. So I think any exploring, you can do in undergrad would be great.
So don't be afraid to talk to graduate students if you're in a research position, or if you're not in a research position. Tyler had made a great suggestion of looking at the classes you've taken. And if there was a class that you really enjoyed, making an appointment with that faculty member for office hours and say, tell me about where you went to graduate school. And if I want to study what we talked about in class, how do I go about doing that? And those networks are really important. We have a couple other good questions that have come in, and one is for Tyler specifically. So I'm going to have you speak again from Adita. She said, and I don't know, oh, Tyler, you already gave an answer to that one. Never mind. Okay, so I'm not catching up here. So she talked about, she had some questions about how to narrow down in computer science. Nicholas asked a question about identifying a graduate advisor. So I know that some programs, that when you apply to that program, you have to make a connection with a research advisor, and that's the person who you end up working with. Other programs sometimes have a rotation period where you're taking a couple courses and you might rotate through labs. Could some of you comment on how you identified your graduate advisor that you've been working with?
I can start us off here.
Thanks, Caitlin.
My approach, like I said, was the funnel approach, and I had a couple of people here at MSU that I was looking at for my research, and essentially I came up here, had a visit with both of them. They both had very different research styles and research labs, so it was definitely like feeling like almost a forced choice here, like, do I want the really hands-on, really collaborative lab, or do I want the more hands-off kind of isolation style? Not isolation in a bad way, but you just kind of get to work on your own thing. I was actually very lucky in that I got the best of both worlds, so they co-advised me. Sometimes that's not always possible, but even right now I'm co-advised by one of the advisors from my master's degree and someone else at Rutgers University. So there's always different ways, like your PhD committee, it can have people from outside the university, so you can make those collaborations. Finding people is really, you start by networking, you start by talking to that professor in your class, going to conferences and talking to people. The biggest thing that I think benefited me with conferences as an undergraduate is not necessarily going for the learning. You might see a cool presentation, but it's not really, for me, a place to get new knowledge. That's what we have journals for. Really, a conference is somewhere to network and meet new people and make those connections for the future.
And those connections are really important, because there could be several, in some programs, 50, 60, 100 applications for programs. And if a faculty member has met you somewhere, or they know your research mentor, a phone call from them and an email makes a big difference. Can someone else respond to either how they found their graduate advisor, or Nicholas asked a question about It's not just the research area, it's also personality and fit. How did you go about finding a good placement for yourself?
In terms of like finding the right match with the personality wise, it always helps to talk to current graduate students in that particular group. So, I mean, I had done that when I got accepted into programs. So looking at graduate students and just sending them an email about, do you have some time to talk or something? And I know this, or if that's not possible, you can even ask the professor to share contact details of their current graduate students. Sometimes professors do that because my advisor has asked me if he can share my contact detail with prospective students. And usually you get pretty much an honest opinion and a roughly good idea about how things are in the group. Like what's the frequency of meetings? What does weekly group meetings look like? And what's the expectations of the supervisor? What's the track record of previous graduate students? So that gives you a general idea of how the group functions and whether the personality and the working style matches with you. So that's one way.
I'm muted. Does anyone else have anything else to add? I'm curious from our panelists. Oh, Tyler, if you have something to add, I have a question, but go ahead and answer.
Okay. Was this in regards to Nicholas's question?
Yes.
Okay. So this was the one about very focused research in the background? Or?
There were two Nicholases. Oh, so this is the other Nick. Let me scroll down here about Nicholas, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, Nicholas Di Tommaso, about identifying a graduate advisor who was a good research match, but also a good match for professionalism and working style.
Oh, I guess I can quickly comment on that as well.
Sure.
I think one important thing is contacting them directly. So I know some students might be a little shy to do that, or just kind of just their own personalities. And if they don't reply back in the first email, send them again, because a lot of the times their inbox will be flooded and they might not see it, or maybe you caught them at the wrong time and they clicked on it and then they forgot to go back. And so just directly applying to departments, I think might be a little bit of a disadvantage, because I know some professors won't even really consider those, that they receive so many direct applicants that are qualified that by the time they've looked at the pool coming from the department, they've already made up their mind, like, these 3 people contacted me, I was looking to get 2 students. And so, yeah, I think that just directly reaching out to professors, even if at other universities, is a really good thing.
If I could just add on to that, some programs will have visitation days where they bring in admitted students to the program. Quick show of hands from our panelists. Did you attend a preview day or a admitted students day for your respective department? Okay, a show of 1 in physics. So physics and Tyler. The department that I was in many years ago had something like that. And so Rahul's comment about talking to other graduate students about what it's like to work with that faculty member and asking for names of people who have worked with them is also a good idea of how to get an idea about that professionalism and what their work style is like. I see that we have another question from Nicholas Grable about when applying to PhD programs, is it better to have a very focused research background as an undergrad or more broad exposure? Does anyone want to answer that question? Or could anyone answer that question? Julia.
I think when applying, I could go both ways. I personally had a lot of very different experiences as an undergrad, and I think that made me a better applicant just because I had a lot of different experiences and I gained a lot from all those different experiences. And so I was able to really show that on my resume, show that in all my personal statements and everything. I had actually never done any work in the field that I'm working in now. but I was still applying to it. So I think for me, it benefited not having it. But I think also if you have a lot of experience in it, then you can really talk highly about that field and show that you have a passion for it. So I think both ways would be beneficial.
And I think it's important to remember that while the graduate school application process is very competitive, you go to graduate school to specialize. So no one expects you to be an expert in that area straight out from graduating from your undergraduate program. So that's why you go to graduate school. So that was a really helpful comment. Does anyone else have anything else to add to Nicholas's question about whether you need to have a specialized background to apply for graduate school?
I would just say that like having a lot of experiences, different experiences help, but also make sure to, connect each of the experiences, however unrelated, but just make sure to like connect, articulate like what you learned, what you gained from each experience and how that will help you in graduate school. So in the statement of purpose, be sure to make that connection to leverage your multiple experiences.
Thank you. Tyler?
I would say if this, like very focused direction is something you already know that you want to do and that you want to pursue the graduate school for, then definitely, trying other things probably isn't worth your time. But if it's just an undergraduate experience that you've had, and maybe, although very fortunate and happy to have had it, it's not something that you're really sure that you want to do for the next 4, 5, 6 years, then probably exploring is a better option, where I don't think that many professors will take into consideration kind of depth versus breadth in terms of undergrad research, because already they know that it's kind of just scratching the surface anyway as compared to what you would be doing in grad school. So then choosing the option that's better for you, I think is better to optimize what's better for you in general than what you think will be better on a graduate application.
Thanks, Tyler. We're going to transition to our next question, which also aligns with a question we had from one attendee about why they chose MSU for their master's or PhD program. So briefly, if we could hear from 2 or 3 of you about why you chose MSU. And then a second question is, is it okay to also go to MSU for a doctoral program or a master's degree program if you've come here for an undergraduate degree program? And I know there's different opinions on that. While the panelists decide who's going to go first, I see that Christina also has posted a quick poll here about your thought about attending MSU for graduate school. So if our attendees could just respond to that real quick. Why MSU? Who would like to begin? Caitlin.
So for me, it was kind of like a forced choice at the end of my undergraduate career. So I got to my junior year and my undergraduate mentor had departed the university for promotion. So I was pretty set on working with him and getting my master's and then possibly doing something else if I wanted to pursue a PhD. So it was kind of like, all right, well, he's gone. So I'm just going to broaden where I'm looking and figure things out from there. I do think there is a significant benefit of doing at least one degree somewhere else. Even just getting one degree in a different lab or department at the same university, that could be enough. But I think it just helps to broaden your experience. I know there are 2 different schools of thought on this, and there are great people out there who are going to the same university for all their degrees. But I personally think it helps to see different perspectives, especially because someday you're going to be working, possibly running your own lab, your own research team in industry. So you want to be able to know how to work with different personalities and how to navigate some of those challenges.
Thanks, Caitlin. I'll also add that if you're an undergraduate researcher and you're currently engaged in a research position, trying to get a summer research experience at a different institution or an REU, a research experience for an undergraduate, is a great way also to get a a short 10-week view of what life is like at a different institution. And the Undergraduate Research Office has programs that talk about how to find an REU. COVID-19 has changed REUs radically for summer 2020, but hopefully for summer 2021, things may be back to normal. Could someone else talk about why they decided to come to MSU for their doctorate? We heard from Caitlin, but it would be great to hear from at least one other person on our panel. Rahul?
Yeah, so personally for me, it was a very big move, like moving from India all the way to MSU, specifically here. But it was, I basically chose MSU because of like two reasons. One was the lab. The facility for rare isotope beams is a world-class facility. It's the best here. And the nuclear physics program is pretty good. So one thing I would say is also look at the specific graduate programs that you're applying to, along with the university, other parameters. And the other part was MSU was very flexible in terms of like opportunities here. For example, I had my minor in computer science and engineering during my undergrad. And I liked physics, but I also wanted to have that computer science, like computational background with me. So they offer like a dual PhD along with the CMSC department, which is the computational math, science and engineering department. So those were two specific reasons that I chose to come to MSU.
Thanks, Rahul. Does anyone else have anything else to add before we move on?
I have a quick comment.
Sure, Julia.
One of the things that I was considering when I was looking at where to apply was also national labs and where the connections are. So if you are interested in doing any research there eventually, finding schools that have good connections or faculty that maybe have connections there could work better, because then you would be able to go to those labs as well. So like I work with CERN, and so I'm able to go out there frequently, which is great. So if you're trying to narrow down schools, that could be a good resource, is to look at faculty members who also do work in these other fields, or even like in chemistry, if you want to work for like NIST or something, going to those schools or something.
So Julia, you talk about the term connections, like national labs and schools who have connections. Can you elaborate or explain what you mean by that?
Sure. Yes. So I guess just professors who maybe they could do research in both areas. So with my research, none of the actual experiment is here in the United States. There's some detectors being built here, but the giant collider is in Switzerland. So if I knew that I wanted to work with Atlas going into grad school, I would seek out faculty members who did research on that, and then I would work with those faculty members who were there, so that way I would have the chance to go out there, and then that would also help with like fellowships and later on with all of those things.
So networking is so important, and I don't want folks on the call to be dissuaded from attending graduate school because they maybe don't have a well-established network. That's why it's really important to talk to faculty, those if you're in a research lab, or if we talked about this earlier, if there's a class that you've taken, you really felt a connection, or you like that particular topic, make an appointment with that faculty member or that grad assistant or TA during office hours and talk about your interests, and they can start to expand your research interests. And for the sake of time, we have about 20 minutes left. I want to make sure we get to some of these other facilitated questions, and keep posting the questions. Joseph, I see your question about how can you improve your chances of getting accepted into a graduate program without any undergraduate research experience. I don't know if anyone has an answer to that. I have an answer, but I'm happy to, I'm curious to hear from our panelists if they have any thoughts on Joseph's question.
I'm not sure when you'd be applying, but I would say it's never too late. So, you could start as soon as possible. Just start sending out emails to some of your professors, and it might be a little more difficult now with things being online, but I'm sure that, especially if you're willing to do some research unpaid, that there would definitely be some opportunities you could still be able to find.
And I'll also add to that is that, when I talk to faculty who mentor undergraduate students, some of them didn't have a research experience, or they came to their faculty mentor their senior year and had a semester of experience. A lot of research mentors prefer you to start the research experience earlier, your sophomore or junior year, but as Tyler said, better late than never. So don't let if you're a senior this year and you haven't had a research experience, don't let that deter you from trying to gain one. I'm curious from our panelists who about their application process. Just a quick show of hands. Were any of you rejected from a graduate program? Okay, so thank you for being honest. Something that came up in our conversation yesterday with our social science group is that people applied to 5 or 6 graduate programs and they were sometimes rejected, and that often hurts, but it's also part of the process is that people talked about a dream school, a backup school, and then schools they thought they had a good chance with. Can anyone comment on like how they about just that process of deciding on what school might be a dream school and what we mean by that concept? Go for it, Tyler.
So I guess I had only applied to 5 schools because I thought I knew exactly what I was gonna want to do, although I ended up changing anyway. So I only applied to the schools that were very strong in that specific subfield, and had been rejected from one of them. And I would say that this idea of a dream school is kind of like, consider where you're getting your undergrad, your experiences, maybe talk with some faculty members that you kind of trust and get their opinion of like where they think you would fit in, like rank X. And so if you think, if I can get into a rank X school, maybe I'll also try applying to some that are much better. And some maybe as like, they call them like backup schools sometimes, of if I don't get into where I want, would I be willing to compromise at another school that I don't have to wait another year, kind of like having a gap year. So I think also another quick comment is it gets better. So applying for faculty jobs, there's no application fee. And that was the one thing discouraging about graduate programs.
I would also say it's really important, adding on to what Tyler said, is talking to your research mentor. A few years ago, I was talking to a mentor about some of his students who had applied to graduate school, and he made the comment to me that she wasn't applying to competitive enough programs, that she had underestimated her ability as an undergraduate researcher. So don't undersell yourself, don't exclude yourself, but I think it's really important to have those conversations with a graduate assistant or a faculty mentor about where you could apply and what your potential are. I want to transition a little bit to our third question of here is how graduate school is different from your undergraduate experience. Undergraduate experiences, you have general education courses, you might have college requirements, and you have department requirements. But when you get to a master's degree program or a doctoral degree program, things are more focused. So if 2 or 3 of the panelists could talk about what, in broad terms, how their grad lives are different from when they were an undergrad student. Caitlin.
This one. Yeah, so strangely, I feel like I have more time now that I'm a graduate student, and it might just be pandemic right now and being stuck at home and not having the commute and random meetings everywhere. But you don't have all the classes, so you're not taking like 12 to 16 hours of classes each semester. I think the most classes I took was my first semester here, and that was because I had to catch up a little bit on some engineering stuff. And that was nine credit hours of classes. And that's typically a very heavy load for someone in my field. So you're taking maybe 1 to 2 classes your first couple of years of your PhD, and then you can just kind of settle on research hours after that. As far as like research time and how I spend my time doing research is pretty similar to when I was undergrad. So I know there are a lot of people who work, 60 hours in graduate school, but that's not really my work style. I tend to get things done quickly. Not really belabor it. If I can't get to something one day, it's not really a big deal. This again is where you're going to have some kind of you want to look at how your advisor manages that too. I know there are a lot of advisors who say you need to be in the office 8 to 5 doing work all day long. You should be writing X number of hours a day. You should be doing this, working at the lab bench X number of hours a day. But I tend to give myself a very flexible work schedule, and I know that I'm able to take breaks when I need to. So yeah, I do feel it's better because you don't have the classes and you can spend extra time kind of doing the research, taking care of yourself, and just really enjoying graduate school.
Thank you. Could we hear from another panelist, please? Anyone else about the differences between grad school and your undergrad experiences?
I also feel like that I have a little bit more time than I did as an undergrad. As an undergrad, I feel like I was just constantly in the lab, like living in the lab. But now I feel like it's a lot better. It's not like I'm living in the lab, but I still have work to do and I get that done. But it's not like, oh, I need to be in there 24 hours a day watching this experiment. It's like, okay, I'm going to do my allotted number of hours I set out, and I'm going to get as much as I can get done. And if I need help, I'll contact my advisor and I'll reach out to him, and he and I will work together. And it's very nice. I will say that. Also, like the first few years, like you are taking more classes, and the classes are a lot more specialized. So I personally enjoy them a lot more. I remember just sitting in English classes, and those weren't always my favorite classes. So I feel like while the classes are harder and you do have a ton of work, it's worth it, and it's a lot more enjoyable, and it's fun. And while you're like, wow, I have like 80 problems to do, that's an exaggeration, but like I have 80 problems to do, but they're all fun problems, they're all exciting. So it's a trade-off, but it's a lot, I feel like it's a lot more enjoyable as a grad student personally.
Some doctoral programs have cohort programs, or they refer to a cohort, which often means they might admit, 12 students or 20 students into a year, or whatever number it might be. Could anyone comment on the social side of graduate school? Not so much the research, but how you meet students who are in your cohort, or students who are maybe a year or two ahead of you, and just how you get to know people in your new graduate program.
I would say that we are a very social group. So for my year, we are the largest group of students they ever admitted at one time. There's 50 of us, which is a lot of incoming graduate students, but we all talk all the time. They have what's called the grad room, where we all just have a bunch of workspaces. And so the first year we were just all in there working on problem sets together, just, talking, kind of all just like existing in the same place. It's a little different now due to the pandemic, but we have a lot of like, giant group Zoom meetings where we do sort of the similar thing, where we all just get together and we're like, working on all the homework sets together, because you're mostly in the same classes with all these incoming students. So, you interact with them all the time.
Every department is a little bit different. So is there someone else who wants to talk about the culture in their academic department in regards to socialization of new graduate students and how you meet people?
So I was actually, I am in a very small program compared to Julia's program. So we probably have, traditionally, I think back when I started 6 years ago, we had maybe 4 or 5 coming in each year. And then we kind of really just dwindled down to maybe 1 or 2, but we're on the upswing again. So I think we've had 5, 6 come in just for this upcoming year. But it really just, like these little cohorts or lab groups, sometimes they'll develop their own culture, and it can be a little bit difficult to insert yourself in that, especially if you're like one of the only students in your lab group, or if your lab group has been traditionally one that doesn't really participate in the department events. It can be a little bit difficult, but I see my department, like I've been there 6 years, so I'm one of the senior members now. So it's interesting to make that transition from brand new, looking at everybody else for advice, and now being the senior member who the new students are coming in, and you're kind of like the first person they see that they're like, wow, I'm going to be you someday. It really helps to know what you want when you're in that position. Like, it helps to know, like, I struggled fitting in my first couple of years, so I'm going to make sure no other student has to struggle with that. So it's really a very cultures change, between departments, between years in the same department, between lab groups. So yeah.
And so that might also be a good question to ask during when you talk to other students who are currently in the graduate program that you're looking at, is how they socialize new students into the program. We have just under 10 minutes left, so to our attendees, if you have any last questions, please make sure you submit them so we have time to answer them. We did have a question submitted about a student is graduating in the fall, and so most doctoral programs won't start until the fall semester, and so there's that spring semester. They asked, how do you still progress professionally, if you're facing a fall graduation? How do you stay connected to your department when there aren't many opportunities available to someone who is not in a PhD program in that gap semester? So if anyone has any ideas or suggestions.
I could probably answer this one pretty quickly. My connection's not so great, so if I come through a little patchy, apologies for that. But there's nothing wrong with taking a little bit of time and getting a job, and just kind of waiting it out. I'd say try and get a job for at least a year so you don't look like a flight risk on your resume. But even thinking about my experience, I went straight from undergrad to master's with the summer between off. And then after my master's, I took a year and I did consulting on my own because I wasn't sure PhD was the right thing for me. So, I think definitely there's nothing wrong with going out, getting work experience, getting that industry perspective, because at the end of the day, you want to go to graduate school, and if you're not motivated to do science and answer the questions and ask why, you're not going to enjoy living on a tiny salary and working really hard. So there has to be that extra motivation, and sometimes a job can help you get there.
Thanks, Caitlin. I would also add that, at colleges and universities, things are on a semester cycle. And so if you're graduating in December, there might be a research assistant opening up in different labs, maybe not with the person you've been working with, but sometimes people graduate early, sometimes people need to leave. COVID-19 is causing different changes. So don't be afraid to poke around at your current institution or nearby institutions. We're at Michigan State, but several people have been research associates at the University of Michigan, just down the road. So you have to put yourself out there and look for things. We have one more question that has come in about managing finances. And so all of you are living on a graduate school budget, and the question is, how do you manage your finances through in graduate school? Some people get fellowships, some people get scholarships, some people don't, but any advice as current graduate students of how you manage finances while in graduate school?
I think the question of like significant debt, typically if you're doing STEM, probably you don't need to worry about that the money that you'll get from fellowships, scholarships, RA, TA positions, that kind of however you're getting paid, typically it's more than enough to have your basic needs met, and then also some fun activities or personal things that you want to buy. So I think you shouldn't ever worry like, will I go into debt if I go to graduate school? That ultimately you'll probably have a higher salary, be doing work that you probably prefer, more aligned with your interests than if you would get a job out of undergrad. And so if having no debt and getting to work on what you prefer and also getting the fun of grad school, I don't think there's really a downside there.
So Tyler, you use some words or terms that people may not be familiar with. You talked about an RA or a TA. Could you explain what you mean by that?
So the RA is a research assistant position. So the TA is a teaching assistant position where, so if you don't have some kind of fellowship or scholarship through some kind of like National Science Foundation or through the department, the university, you might get paid directly through your advisor. And so your advisor might get money from some kind of organization, whether it's something like the Department of Defense, and then they will pay you to just do your research on a specific project. The other option is you might be the teaching assistant for a course, where you'll do some things like giving some lectures, maybe grading some assignments, holding office hours. And so basically any way that you would be funded through graduate school, at least at the PhD level, is typically sufficient. But I think there is some concern if doing like a master's before a PhD, that not all master's programs will be covered. And so that's something to maybe take into consideration when thinking whether or not it's applicable or reasonable to do a master's first.
Other comments from anyone else on fellowships or assistantships?
Oh, yeah. So typically, I mean, I agree with whatever Tyler said. So typically graduate schools, when they accept you, they make sure that you're funded like for your duration. It can be a combination of research assistantship, teaching assistantship, fellowship, everything. And in general, like the funding package consists of 3 primary components. One is your tuition fees for a certain number of credits to make progress towards your degree. Another thing is the health insurance, which is provided by the university, at least at MSU. I'm not sure about other institutions. And the third is the stipend, which is money that you get for meeting your basic expenses. So, I mean, it's pretty much sufficient to cover any of the expenses. And I haven't heard of anyone like having to go into debt in graduate school because of graduate school. So.
And some of that depends on your disciplinary area. I think Tyler made the comment that in STEM areas, your stipend is usually a very competitive stipend to live off of, but stipends will vary by institution. So a stipend is a fee. It's like a salary that you get paid for being a research assistant or for being a teaching assistant. And that usually that also covers the cost of so many credits of tuition as well. So that varies by department and by program, and that's something to talk to a graduate coordinator for. Most doctoral programs will have someone who's in charge of the application process and reviewing applications and cultivating and putting together the incoming class of graduate students. So make sure you talk to that graduate coordinator, and he or she can talk about fellowship opportunities and different assistantship opportunities. We are just about out of time here, so I want to thank everyone. First, for our attendees, thank you for choosing to sign up and listening to our program. You'll see here on the slide the emails of all of our panelists. So if one of them said something that you have further questions about, please feel free to email them. You also have the email for the undergraduate research office there. If you have another question, and we're happy to field that question, then connect you to someone on campus who can answer it if we can't answer it. Finally, thank you to our panelists. I appreciate you taking the time out to serve as a resource for our attendees. Last but not least, when you exit the webinar, there will be just a short survey. Please take a minute to fill that out so we can improve our experience for other webinars that we host. Thank you, everyone, again. Stay safe and stay healthy. This concludes the webinar.